Well, hello and welcome to our Bible study time. Last week we were looking at the servant who has run across Rebecca, the woman chosen by God to marry Isaac. And then we ran into this character Laban, and we talked about this that we need to beware of Laban and all the characters he represents. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing, so to speak. And the purpose of discussing Laban, and we'll continue to talk about him a little bit here, is not to cause us to become cynical or to look at any individual whom we may know with suspicion or distrust. Um, my words certainly are not intended to point fingers or to cause you to point fingers at any individual. In these critical last days that we live in, however, we must understand that deception is more and more prevalent in our world than truth seems to be. If you don't happen to be in a relationship with a Laban personality right now, more than likely you will be before too long. So we're in scriptures warned to be wary of people like that and to, I think, be prepared to encounter people like that. So let's allow God to train us in the scriptural stories here to be discerning as to people who appear spiritual but aren't. And perhaps more importantly, while you are at this study here, let's ask God to search out and expose any aspects of the Laban personality which lives in us, so that we can be purified, receive a cleansing, a purging from God of any of these tendencies or characteristics that might be in us. So today we're going to look at this marriage contract being fulfilled. Abraham's servant uh, um, um, may or may not have recognized who Laban really was as an opportunist and a deceiver. But that really didn't matter. He had come to redeem Rebekah from the house of Laban. He therefore accompanied Laban back to the house, entered his home, and waited. Actually, it's his father's home, but Laban claimed it as his own. He waited. The servant waited his appropriate moment to make his move. Um, the stranger came into the house and unmuzzled his camels, the scriptures say, and he gave the camels straw and fodder, um, and provided water for the men with him to wash their feet. Food was served, but he said, "I will not eat until I have spoken my piece." And this is Genesis 24, verses 32 and 33. In ancient times, the world of the Middle East, in the world of the Middle East, one didn't eat with just anyone, unless the parties understood each other and had some common ground of agreement. There really couldn't be a sharing of bread between them, or at least that was the culture of the time. And hence the servant would not eat the food offered to him by Laban until he had both explained his mission and his intentions and heard the response of Rebekah's family. So, with the platters of food sitting untouched and growing cold in front of him, the servant painstakingly laid out the reason for the circumstance of his visit and his intentions regarding Rebekah. The only place his explanation of the events about which we have previously read in chapter 24 varied from the events as they were told by scriptures is when he explained the reason he had stopped everything at the well, bowed to the earth, and blessed the Holy One. Um, Concerning this point, he felt the need to advise everyone there very plainly. He said, I prostrated myself to the Holy One. I blessed the Holy One, God of my master Abraham, who led me on a true path. And the Hebrew, this idea to get a niece of my master for my son. That's Genesis 24:48. There, the servant has said it plainly. He's not there by accident, but by intelligent design. He has come on a divine mission to retrieve a niece of his master for Isaac's bride. And so here, in a sense, is the betrothal, or a proposed betrothal. With the cat being out of the bag, Abraham's servant wasted no time but proceeded immediately to pop the all-important question. And so now, if you want to do what is kind and right to my master, tell me, is what he says. If not, say so, and I will go to the right or the left. And that's Genesis 24, verse 49. And I imagine there was a pregnant pause here, a moment. From an earthly standpoint, all seems to hinge upon the response of Laban and the rest of Rebekah's family members to this proposal. If they will accept a betrothal agreement for Rebekah and Isaac, the meal before them will be the sealing of that covenant. If they refuse, well, the servant must see to it that they don't refuse. Laban and Bethuel both spoke up. It is something from the Holy One, they said. We cannot say anything bad or good. Here is Rebekah in front of you, is what they said. And take her and go. Let her be a wife for your master's son, as the Holy One has spoken. So the deal is done. Now for the formal covenant proceedings, the covenant down payment or sign, the bride price, the covenant meal, and the setting of the date for the marriage starts next. I guess you'd say that in the negotiating. And the ot is the Hebrew word for this idea of a down payment. And according to ancient history of covenant protocols, for a covenant to be sealed, the stronger partner in the covenant relationship had to present to the weaker partner, or the vassal, had to present some kind of gift or some kind of gift, and the weaker partner had to accept this down payment, something like an earnest money in real estate transactions today. The point was that the stronger partner had to begin performance of his covenant obligations, and the weaker partner had to receive and step under the protection of that performance. In a marriage covenant, the stronger partner traditionally is the husband, undertakes to support and provide for the physical and emotional security of the weaker partner, traditionally the wife. Therefore, the down payment, or the ot in Hebrew, covenant sign, relates to that undertaking, something valuable that can be sold or traded for support, and a place of safe dwelling is to be given to and accepted by the weaker partner. And weaker, don't think in terms of not strong, but well, we can't get into all of that. Ephesians, and Peter gets into some of that as well. But the one receiving. So we're told that the servant brought out gold and silver jewelry, as well as articles of clothing, and he gave them to Rebekah. And this is Genesis 24:53. The gold and silver jewelry the servant brought out were offered and accepted as down payments, as signs, as it were, assuring Rebekah she would always be provided for. In the same way, the articles of clothing the servant brought out and tendered as an earnest deposit assured Rebekah and her family that in the context of the covenant that was being cut, she would always be clothed and sheltered. So here's the negotiations that, in a sense, were happening here. was a bride price that was paid. In the ancient world, a girl of marriageable age performed valuable services for her family. To take her away from that family for marriage required, therefore, that the family be compensated for the loss of her services. Hence, once it was agreed that Rebekah would marry Isaac, the servant of Abraham brought forth the bride price to the family. Immediately after giving Rebekah the gifts which were to assure her of her bridegroom's intentions to perform all the covenant undertakings of marriage for her, the servant turned his attention to those who would consider themselves deprived of Rebekah's services. And he gave precious gifts to her brother and mother. And this is Genesis 24 in the midsection of verse 53. And all the gifts were accepted. The loss of Rebekah was now compensated for. The covenant was now cut, was agreed upon. The next step in the proceeding was the covenant meal. And partaking of the covenant meal, the closest thing we in our modern Western culture have experienced of a covenant meal is an engagement party or a rehearsal dinner, at which a meal is shared by the families and friends of the prospective bride and groom. But the covenant meal was a part of all ancient covenants, not just covenants of marriage. By sharing a meal together, the participants in the covenant declared themselves at peace, not just with each other, but also with all the commitments and conditions set forth in the covenant. So Scripture describes the covenant meal at the house of Bethuel, Rebekah's father, as follows here. And then he ate and drank, he and his men, and they spent the night, Genesis 24, verse 54. And it's interesting to note that the only ones Scripture refers to as eating are the servant and his men. Just perhaps, Laban was not quite as on board with the covenant as he had previously let on. We'll see about that later. The setting of the date is Laban's going to kind of finagle, and his mom are going to kind of finagle with the date. It had been agreed that Rebekah would marry Isaac. The sign of the covenant had been tendered and accepted by Rebekah. The bride price had been offered and received by her family members, but no one as of yet had discussed a date for the marriage. And perhaps sensing the spiritual climate he was in, the servant of Abraham did not wish to linger in Laban's house, for it was now obvious, I think, that he had usurped Bethuel's position of leadership in the home. And so he said, and after they and he and his men had eaten and slept, and having awakened in the morning, he said, "Let me go back to my master's home." That's Genesis 24, verse 54. And at this point, the crawfishing begins. Remember that before the meal, while the covenant negotiations were going on, Laban and Bethuel had both said, "Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go and let her be a wife for your master's son, as God has spoken." Now, however, Laban and his mother contrive maybe a new plan, and they usurp Bethuel's answer to the contract and his authority, and suggest the marriage be delayed for a period of time. The period of time they propose to delay the wedding is interpreted by some as a week or 10 days, but by other scholars as a year to 10 months. The servant, however, was not in a mood to negotiate. He had experienced quite enough of Laban's double talk. He wanted to take Rebekah and leave for home right then. It was finally agreed that the parties would settle the disagreement over timing in a very gentlemanly way by asking Rebekah her preference. And here's how Scripture records it. They summoned Rebekah and said to her, "Do you wish to go with this man?" "I will go," she replied in Genesis 24:58. And from this, the scholars of the Old Testament Hebrew scholars derive that no one may be married against their choice. They said that this scripture proclaims this. It's now settled. Rebekah and the servant were on their way. 500 miles of dusty roads lay ahead for them. The lives of Isaac and Rebekah are both about to change forever. Rebekah has been redeemed from the house of Laban. More than that, she has been chosen to become the wife, the Hebrew word, the Isha, the power equal to the one that will carry the seed, the heir of the covenant which God had determined to use to redeem mankind. And as I close here, I want to just, maybe I've given Rebekah's family too much grief here. They did bless her, and I wanted to look at that in our closing. And so to their credit, Rebekah's family didn't send her alone nor without their blessing. They sent her with some attendants and a trusted servant who had served as her wet nurse. And this is the blessing that Rebekah's family proclaimed over her. Our sister, may you become thousands of myriads. May your descendants inherit the gate of their foes. And that's Genesis 24:6. And to this very day, in Orthodox Jewish circles, these words are spoken by every bride's family members to the bride. All right, I'll stop there as we continue on in Genesis, and next week we'll see Rebekah and Isaac meet. Have a great week. Talk to you later. Blessings. Bye now.